Alrighty then, and welcome along to the Cult of Nick. So, this is my podcast, you've downloaded it, thanks for doing that. Let's chat now about whether or not we actually die. So, on the show we have Dr. Penny Sartori, and she's written a book which I've just been enjoying called What is a Near-Death Experience? But let me tell you this, she has a PhD in near-death experiences. Dr. Penny Sartori, thanks for joining us.
Hi Nick, it's great to be here.
So, a PhD in near-death experiences, how do you do that?
Well, it's just one of those things that sort of came about, really. I used to work as a nurse, and I was a nurse for 21 years, and I was in intensive care for 17 of those years. And it was very early on in my nursing career that I began to think, what happens when we die? It was sparked by the death of a patient who was clearly dying, and it really upset me. And so I started reading about death and came across near-death experiences. And I just thought, wow, these people are telling us that death is nothing to be afraid of. And I thought maybe there's something that I could learn from this. And so, of course, I was working in the ideal place to research these experiences, and that's what I wanted to do. So I decided I wanted to do this research, and at the end of it, I was awarded a PhD, which was a lovely bonus for something that I was loving doing. So that's how it came about, basically.
So the patient who drew you into this, what happened there? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, he'd been in intensive care for about 14 weeks, and he was clearly at the end of his life. And I can remember this night shift, and I had just adjusted the electric bed to carry out some routine nursing care. And the man was in so much pain, he nearly jumped out of bed in agony. And at that point, our eyes connected, and it's almost as if I'd swapped places with him, and I could feel and understand what he was going through. And he couldn't talk because he was connected to the ventilator with a tracheostomy, but he was mouthing the words to me, "Leave me alone, let me die in peace." And that just had a huge effect on me. So all I could do was I called the doctor. He increased the painkillers, and I just literally sat with that man for the next 2 or 3 hours and held his hand and made him as comfortable as possible. But that had a profound effect on me. He died a few hours after my shift ended, and it was just something that was on my mind for a very long time. So that's where my interest in death really sparked from.
Surely that's not the first time you encountered death, though, right?
No, I working in intensive care, you see death very frequently, and sometimes you can see about 3 or 4 deaths in just one shift. But I think it was something different about that man. I think when our eyes connected, I think that made the difference. It's almost as if I realised I could be in that position, or one of my family members could be in that position, and I could just kind of understand what he was going through. And, when you think about it, the last few weeks of his life were under the control of the nursing routine and the hospital routine that was there, and it's just, I don't know, it's not the sort of death I would want for myself or for any of my loved ones. And so I thought if we had a greater understanding of death, maybe it would enhance what we do for end-of-life care for future patients.
So you're looking into this initially because obviously, well, you're working 17 years in intensive care. It might be quite handy to know about the final stages of someone's life, right?
Yes, that's right. That was my main interest, really, is what happens when we die? What is this process of death? What is it all about? And what can we do to enhance patient care?
So, well, first of all, talk us through some of your thoughts and conclusions on this. Let's see where your head is at with this. What do you think happens?
Well, initially, my nurse training was very scientific, and so I was a little bit sort of sceptical as to what these experiences were. So I wanted to find out, were they the effects of the drugs that we give the patients? Were they the effects of abnormal blood chemistry levels? Or were they some sort of hallucination? So during the course of my 5-year study, I interviewed the patients who had survived critical illness and cardiac arrest. And I also looked at the medical data, such as what drugs they'd been given, what their blood results were like. And I found that I couldn't find an explanation for these experiences. Some people had these experiences when no drugs were administered. Some people had the experience when their oxygen levels were quite normal. And so the usual kind of scientific explanations for the experience, they weren't supported by the research that I did. And so I realised then that we don't understand consciousness, because obviously these patients who I'd interviewed had clearly had experiences, but we couldn't explain them. But even more so, we couldn't explain them away anymore, because these were experiences that were being researched in the clinical area. Now, the best case example that I had in my research was patient 10. He had a near-death experience while I was looking after him, and I didn't realise at the time that he was having a near-death experience. I can remember we'd put him to sit in the chair in the morning. He was making a very good recovery from critical illness. But as soon as he sat in the chair, I noticed that his breathing pattern changed and the oxygen monitor began to alarm. And he was ventilated with a tracheostomy as well. So I give him some extra oxygen through the ambu bag. But then his heart rate went into a very fast rhythm very briefly, and his blood pressure dropped. And he went grey and clammy, and all of these are signs of a cardiac arrest ensuing. So I thought, if I don't get him into bed now, he's going to have a cardiac arrest in the chair. So my colleagues and I quickly flung him back into bed, by which point he was deeply unconscious. He wasn't responding to deep, painful stimuli, calling his name. Nothing would rouse him at all. So the doctor came and examined him, and we treated his low blood pressure with some fluid. And then the doctor went back to the emergency he was dealing with elsewhere. And then again the blood pressure started to drop. So I went out to find another doctor, and the consultant who was just coming in on duty that day happened to be walking down the corridor. So I said, "Quick, can you come and see my patient?" So we quickly examined him, shone a pupil torch in his eyes. We gave him some more fluid for his blood pressure. And once the consultant was happy his condition was stable, he returned to his office. Now, after about half an hour, the patient did begin to sort of flicker his eyelids and move his limbs, all signs of regaining neurological function. And then about 4 hours later, this man regained full consciousness as the ward round were approaching his bed. And he was trying to tell the doctors something. So the physio got a letterboard, and he spelled out, "I died and I watched it all from above." And so the doctor said, "Oh, right, you'd better tell Penny about that then." So when I interviewed him in depth later on, what he described is that he'd left his body and he was looking down on everything from above. So he could see myself, and once his condition was stable, I'd kind of noticed he dribbled from the side of his mouth. So I cleaned his mouth and I freshened it up with a pink sponge, a lollipop stick. And he described watching me doing that. He also described the doctor and which doctor had examined him when he was unconscious. He also described the physiotherapist poking her head around the curtains, looking very nervous. And all of these things were correct, and they were all occurring at the time when he was deeply unconscious. But further to this, he then went upwards, and he said he found himself in a pink room. And in that pink room was his dead father and a lady he didn't recognise, but he recognised later from photographs as being his deceased mother-in-law. And there was also a figure there as well. And he said, "Now, I'm not sure who this man was, but he had long, scruffy hair that needed a good comb in. It might have been Jesus, but it's not what I expect Jesus to look like." But he said all his pain had disappeared and he was really peaceful and comfortable there. And he really wanted to stay there. But he said this Jesus-type figure said, "No, it's not your time, you have to go back." And as soon as he said that, it's as if he drifted backwards and the image faded in front of him. And as soon as he was back in his body, he was in extreme pain. And he said the pain was so bad that he wished that he had died. Now, an interesting aspect of this case is something that I picked up when I interviewed him, and he misinterpreted one of my questions. Now, this man has cerebral palsy, and his right hand had always been in a permanently contracted position from birth. He was 60 years of age at the time of this experience, and as a result of having had this experience, he feels he can now open out his hand fully. Now, when he first showed me this and demonstrated the opening out of his hand, I didn't realise the significance of it. It was only when I was chatting with the doctors and the physios afterwards, and they both said that shouldn't physiologically be possible because his tendons would be in a permanently contracted position. So in order for his hand to open out, he'd have to have had an operation to release the tendons. Well, no such operation was done, and he didn't have extensive hand physio or anything like that. So that is one aspect that we can't explain. So I think that if we had a greater understanding of these experiences, if we knew what the mechanism was behind that man's hand opening, we could put that mechanism to great use for other patients who have the same ailment as well.
I wonder, I'm absolutely, what's the word, on the edge of my seat with this stuff because it's so interesting and it's the implications of it are so huge and there's so many different angles we can go down here. But let's just unpack what we're saying with that particular case study. Let's just look at what you're talking about here and take this into bits. First of all, one of the things that occurs to me is we could be talking about hallucinations here, surely. I've even heard, I don't know if this is true, I'm sure you'll know more about this, Dr. Penny Sartori, with your PhD in near-death experiences. I've heard that DMT, dimethyltryptamine, a chemical is released in your brain towards the end of death that could provide these sorts of hallucinations. Have you got words to that?
Well, yeah, Dr. Rick Strassman has done some great research with DMT, and he found that people in his studies did report unusual states of consciousness as well. It's quite similar to near-death experiences, but of course when you take drugs, you do it with some form of expectation. Yet with a near-death experience, it's very unexpected and you can't plan to go and have the experience. So there are slight differences in cases of people who've had DMT experiences and near-death experiences because the contexts are different. But surely, of course, perhaps DMT is opening access to this deep altered state of consciousness that people access when they have the near-death experience. So there are definitely similarities there, and it would be great to do more research in this area as well.
You see, this is the thing, and I'm going to come back to something you said before in a little bit about how we don't understand consciousness, and I think you and I completely agree there. But this idea of maybe it being some sort of hallucination, it interested me when I heard it expounded years ago, wherever it was that someone told me about it, just because I was told that the consequences of taking a psychedelic drug like DMT, which naturally occurs in your brain anyway, are often, like you say, in line with what you expect. And I kind of expect that if I had a near-death experience, it'd have certain tropes and characteristics that I've picked up culturally. You go down a tunnel, some people say, and you see a light, and, we've discussed it already, haven't we? Those are kind of the characteristic aspects of that experience in our culture, aren't they?
Well, yes, they are. But again, each culture interprets this experience in a very different way. So, for example, whereas in the West, people are more likely to go through the tunnel towards the bright light, and sometimes they have a life review. Like in India, that life review aspect seems to be replaced by the Book of Deeds. Sometimes people, when they're in this state, they meet Chitragupta, the man with the book, and that book has a list of all their deeds. So it's almost the same sort of experience, but it's interpreted in a very different way with different symbols as well. So it is culturally influenced. But again, we all have the same sort of brain structure as well. So are these experiences just the way that the brain is dying? Is it the dying brain? Is it a hallucination of the dying brain? Well, I've kind of looked at those questions as well, but then you come across cases where people gain information in ways other than through the senses. And if it was a hallucination, how can they gain information that they didn't know about previously? There's a great example of that, of a lady I met back in 2013. I spoke at a conference in Marseille in France, and one of the other speakers was a lady called Raja Ben-Amour. Now, this lady had a near-death experience, and during that experience, she believed that she shrunk down to like a quantum size, and she travelled all around the inside of her body, but she also had a life review back to the time of her birth and also back to the birth of the universe. And it was a really extensive experience that she reported. But the interesting thing about this lady is that after the experience, she suddenly seemed to gain a knowledge of quantum physics that she'd never had before. And this knowledge was so great that it motivated her to go and study it at university level. And in this conference, the organiser had actually interviewed her university professor. And he said that he was puzzled how she had this knowledge of quantum physics, because it's not something that you can acquire through reading lots of books or doing a booster course. Her knowledge was deep-seated knowledge, and in fact he believed that it was beginning to surpass his own knowledge, because what she was writing about in her papers he didn't understand, but it had been confirmed by papers that had been published in physics journals afterwards. So that, to me, is really fascinating. And if it's a hallucination, how did Raja gain that information? So I just think, there's so much that we've got to learn from these experiences, because if all of us could access that kind of information, our worlds would be very different as well.
Yeah, back to the point of culture, and I wonder what you think about this, Penny, but I would say that we have a cultural hang-up about revelation that comes about as a consequence of psychedelic drug use. And, if someone takes a drug that changes the way they think about the world and it gives them an insight that they previously couldn't access, for whatever reason, that's useful, isn't it? I mean, I'm referring now back to the way in which the microchips were designed. I don't know if you know the story of that. Watson and Crick, the discovery of the DNA helix. There'll be listeners who are listening right now who could probably have a huge list of things that have been inspired by psychedelic drug experiences that are then useful in the real world. But I guess for me, what I'm wondering is, are they going out of their head, or are they staying in their head? Are they going anywhere? Are they, do you see what I mean by this?
Yeah, I don't think they're going anywhere. I think they're accessing consciousness. And what my study has kind of led me to believe consciousness is, consciousness is primary. It's primary in the universe. It's there. It exists. And we're unaware of it normally because our brain acts like some sort of filter, and it kind of filters it out because it would be too overwhelming. And I think there are times in our life when that filter action of the brain relaxes, and I think that happens during a near-death experience or when drugs like LSD or DMT are taken. And rather than the brain producing this experience, what it's doing, it's allowing it to be perceived, whereas normally it wouldn't be perceived because the brain is filtering or blocking it out. And that makes more sense to me in explaining these experiences, because if we look at the consciousness as being primary, then near-death experiences are what you would expect as the brain is approaching death. And so there's nothing paranormal about them, there's nothing supernatural about them. It's just a different way of understanding consciousness.
Do you believe we die?
I believe our physical bodies die, but having learned about near-death experiences, I think that perhaps our consciousness may be eternal.
You see, it's interesting you should say this, because I'm one of these people, and I've met other people who are like this. Death is not a popular topic, as I'm sure you're aware, but it is actually one of my favourites. I find it fascinating. It's going to happen to all of us, and obviously we all know people who it's happened to. If you're over the age of 25, that's going to be the case. But the thing about it for me is that I've got to be honest with you, Penny, and I don't know how people are going to take this when I say it. I've never really believed in death.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Have you had any kind of experiences yourself that maybe have reinforced that?
No, I'm speaking here about an intuitive lack of belief in the concept of eternal death. I don't know why that's the case. I'm not particularly, religious or anything like that. I just kind of, it doesn't resonate with me. I don't really believe it. It just doesn't seem like the sort of thing that would happen. And don't get me wrong, I'm with you. I understand that if someone dies, I'm not going to see them again in this life. Of course, I fear it as well.
Yeah.
But I don't believe it's permanent. I can't keep a straight face with that idea. And I don't know why, but I've no substance for this belief. This is just a gut feeling, right?
Well, yeah, a lot of people kind of feel like that, and certainly people who've had the near-death experience definitely feel that, and that they're not afraid of death. As they said, they've died once, and when it's their time, they will not be afraid because they know what to expect, and it was a pleasant process. And also, that's interesting you say that, because another part of the near-death experience is the life review, and also there's lots of research being shown that as people are aging, so they reflect more on their life, and reminiscence in the elderly is very common. And so if death was the end, what would be the point of reflecting on your life? What is the point of the life review about what we've learned from our life if death is the end? Surely you're learning from your life maybe to progress to another level, that we're simply not aware of that level when we're in the physical body.
Yeah, I mean, to try and substantiate my lack of belief in death, I suppose I would point to the fact that the universe appears to operate as a system that doesn't really waste information. It seems to use it and keep processing it, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
keep it on a cycle of movement. And so I wonder then, you now, having looked into these areas, you're still scared of death?
Not really, not as much. When I first started out on this, I'd never really thought about death. And I guess it was fearful and in the background, but I just avoided thinking of it. I think I'm more fearful of the way in which I die, but I'm sure that from what I've learned from my research, the actual process of death, it won't be as bad as what people think it would be. And I think contemplating my own mortality is kind of empowered the way I live my life as well, really. So it's had quite a profound effect on my life more than anything.
Oh, go on, give us more. Explain. What's it done, Penny? How have you improved? Go on.
Well, I suppose the things that used to annoy me before, now they don't annoy me as much as they used to. So, for example, I can remember once being really annoyed because my husband was late home from work, for example, and I was really annoyed about this. But then all of a sudden I was thinking, gosh, he could have been killed in the car on the way home from work, and I turned it round and I was grateful that he was home and he was safe and well. And so it's made me think about the possibilities in life, but it's also made me appreciate what I have. And before I started doing my research, I was really very, very shy, and the thought of doing any public speaking at all really frightened me. But I think because I feel so empowered by what I've learned from my research, that I want to share it with other people as well and empower them and their thoughts and the way they live their life. And so I think it's had a huge effect on me, and it's made me more tolerant of others, and it's certainly made me more loving as well, I think. So it's really empowered me, definitely.
I have multiple different places we can go now with this conversation, and I tell you what, I'm absolutely fascinated by this whole area. But let's get even deeper into this. One of the things that happened to me, what would it be, maybe 5-6 years ago, however long ago it was, is a family member of mine became very ill. And I thought I was watching them dying for a period. And it brought me face to face with that fear of death. And I guess with the life review thing that you're talking about, I mean, I'd have been about 34, 32, 33, something like that. So, midpoint in my life. And being that close to the final reckoning point really makes me agree with what you're saying about the way it changes you philosophically. What it did to me is it drew me more and more into, for want of a better term, New Age philosophy, and the idea that at the end of the day, when you've lived your life, do you know what the best thing to do is? Be a good person. And what's a good person? I think we all know what a good person is, actually, but we pretend we don't. Tell the truth, treat people nicely. And it's that silly, isn't it? And when you are facing death, I think you start to realise how important it is to do the right thing like that. Am I talking alone here? Am I out of my mind?
No, absolutely, and that's one of the effects it's had on me as well, definitely. And it is, you think about how brief our lives are in the scope of things. We're here for a very short period of time, and it's about being and living and enjoying life and being respectful of those around you as well.
I'll give you an example. I was reading a book at the time, and it was, like I say, a new agey self-help type book. It's a good read. It's For the moment, it escapes me the title of the book, but it was arguing that you should always tell the truth, right? Mm-hmm. And it was arguing that you shouldn't even white lie. Mm-hmm. There's no such thing. You should always stick to these ideas. It's called the 4 agreements. That's it. And you should stick to this basic concept of telling the truth. And what it was suggesting is that these were secret teachings, and that there was a sort of special knowledge that had been handed down over the years that you should tell the truth. And then there were a load of other things as well. And as a result of watching my family member almost die, that became quasi-religious for me, and I started to adopt telling the truth as kind of almost a religious belief. And I wonder, do you think it's given you that kind of religious approach to life? Do you understand what I mean by that? Where you kind of this means something more than you can prove to me because I've been through an experience that's initiated me into this belief system, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, doing my research as well kind of initiated me into that sort of way of thinking. And also with my family members who were dying, I had a very different approach to when my grandfather was dying. When my grandmother died 16 years later, and I'd had the benefit of doing my research. And I think not a religious aspect, more spiritual, I think. And I think I draw more from spiritual philosophies than perhaps I would have before. I always used to kind of ignore those things and think they were a load of nonsense. But actually, when you start reading that deep spiritual philosophy, it starts to make sense once you've kind of been initiated into this kind of way of understanding the world.
Because there is a theory, and I'm going to take you out well into the realms of speculation now, so you may just tell me, listen, you're talking nonsense here. Right, so don't worry about saying that if you do. But there is a theory that there's an entire another plane of existence, multiple planes of existence, and that when we have our near-death experiences, if we have one, or if we have a psychedelic experience, or even if we just are talking about intense meditation and practices from these kind of new age techniques, that we enter that realm, and in that realm these truths are self-evident. You should tell the truth, that you should do these things, that is coming from there is what I'm saying, rather than from within us.
Yeah, that's right. Some people who've had the near-death experience say that everything is like transparent. Yeah. So you can't lie to yourself because it's like you're lying to yourself. You know what you've done. You know what you think are your misdeeds and things. And so this realm is totally, totally transparent, and everyone can see through you. So it's reflecting yourself back to yourself, really.
Do you believe that other plane of existence exists in some form or other, or do you see this purely as a biological phenomenon?
No, maybe it is that. It's the fact that they've accessed this heightened state of consciousness, this deep altered state of consciousness, and maybe that's where things are, Perhaps we're looking at locations, but perhaps it's not locations, maybe it's just a state of mind.
Because there's one theory that this kind of stuff is occluded and is kept secret in a way that ties into this, that in theory there are people who are in touch with that other realm that get advice from it and so on, and that we're deliberately kept from it in order to keep us where we are. But there's kind of a hierarchical reach into it. You heard this idea? So that they kind of, the rulers of the world are in touch with these kind of secret chiefs who are sending us information from the other realm. Do you think that's nonsense, or is there anything in your research that suggests there might be some truth in that?
Well, there might be, it's very difficult to kind of say for definite, but certainly when people have the near-death experience and they tap into this altered state of consciousness, they're getting information that they weren't aware of previously. So maybe information is an information field that everything is just stored, like in a hologram, in a holographic picture. If you kind of chop off the leg of someone, it's still there. So it's almost as if all information is out there stored holographically, and sometimes people can access that. And, there's specific ways in which you can access it, one of them being as you approach your death.
Because you say that we don't understand consciousness, and I completely agree with you. And I've heard you speaking and mentioning also that it might be the case that our consciousness is projected into where we are. Is that right? Have I misunderstood?
Yeah, possibly it is projected, because maybe the way that we're interpreting the symbols that appear during the near-death experience does come from the projection of our mind, because, we have these images around us from the time that we're born. So maybe there is a bit of projection there as well. But I just think, I don't know, there's so much that we don't understand about consciousness, and I think just doing this research has just raised more questions than it's answered, and it's literally just scratching the surface of what consciousness is. But it's, unfortunately, there's less research in this kind of field of area than others. So, it's a slower progress in this field simply because there's less funding available for it.
Because some people would argue that, we have we have a soul or an essence, or call it what you want, that is sort of sent from somewhere else to Earth. And then is contained within our brain. That's extra to our brain. That's not real, right?
Don't know. There's no way we can answer it, really. I think the only way you could answer it is when we experience it in its entirety, when we die ourselves, really.
And what about that? I mean, have you found people who look into this sometimes actually look forward to that, to death?
Well, yeah, I have spoken to some people who've had the experience, and it's not like they want to die now, but they know that, it's something, that it is something to look forward to. Sometimes there is a yearning to go back to that state of mind they were in, but I think they are more appreciative of the life that they have, but they know that when it is their time, they won't be afraid, and it's something that they welcome as well.
And when you come to your subject, what new developments should people who are into this area of research, what should they be looking at? I mean, what are the hot topics in the world of near-death experience, Penny?
Well, we're still looking for explanations for it. We still don't know exactly what the cause is, and I think we need to certainly continue with the hospital research, because that's where you can get really valuable information, because we can look at the current explanations, we can look at the blood results and the drugs and things like that. So that's an important aspect. But another important aspect that really fascinates me is that some people after the experience seem to have changes in their electromagnetic field. And there seems to be some sort of link between consciousness and our electromagnetic fields. And I think I would love to do more research in this area as well. So there's a big avenue there. And also, how people are so transformed by the experience. There's a great example of them at the moment, Dr. Rajiv Party. He's an anaesthetist, actually, and he had an experience, and he's based in California. But after his experience, he's been completely transformed, and, the way he lives his life, he's gone from living in a massive mansion to downsizing to a smaller house. Instead of having big gas-guzzling cars, he's got a little hybrid, which is partial electric car. And so he's changed in many ways. And I just think he was deeply depressed, and he was on antidepressants for quite a few years. Now, after his experience, that depression has gone overnight. And, if we could understand that, we could help so many people out there who are also depressed and things like that. So that, there's huge potential in what we can learn from these experiences.
Oh, well, absolutely. And that is made absolutely clear in your book. There are so many strands. It's like one of those woolly jumpers where you think I could just pull that and the whole edifice of reality could come apart if that one string was pulled hard enough.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Do you find it frustrating when you speak to people about this, when they assume that there's no scientific rigour here, that it's just airy-fairy stuff?
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of people like that. And, everyone, I think, has some preconceptions about what near-death experiences are. But then when you look at them in depth, those arguments don't hold up. When you're there in the clinical area, there was a clear difference between... I've nursed thousands of patients who are unconscious, and very often these people have kind of no recollection of anything, or they have a vague memory, or they're very confused and disorientated. Yet, patients who've had the near-death experience, like patient 10, he was completely showing great clarity of thought, he was completely lucid, and he was describing something which is a deeper state of reality than what we're experiencing now. And I think unless you've been in that situation and been with these kinds of patients, it's more difficult to make the distinction. And I think very often there's this kind of skepticism that near-death experiences are just kind of hallucinations, but there's far more to these experiences than we can appreciate. And I think, you really need to kind of spend time, speak with people who've had the experience, engage with what the near-death experience is and have an open mind and don't let your preconceptions get in the way. And then perhaps we'll all have a deeper understanding of what near-death experiences are.
You see, I just wonder whether or not it's the sort of thing we're not supposed to know. And I don't mean that in a mystical sense. I mean literally in the sense that at some point in the hierarchy of humanity, there's someone who's actually stopping us. That's not your area. That's not something you should know about. I remember someone once saying to me that if you knew you lived forever, if you didn't believe in the concept of death, that makes you incredibly hard to control, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we did know all the answers, then there'd be no motivation to learn more and discover more about ourselves. So yes, maybe it is that we're not supposed to know the answers yet, and the not knowing is what keeps us motivated to know more.
I'm inclined to think there might be an element of truth to that, but I wonder, this bit that also is confusing me, this life review thing, is pretty consistent, isn't it? Is it the case that you review your own life, or is there a God figure? Because we were talking about this guy who looked a bit like a weird Jesus in one of the case studies. Is it consistent that there's someone sat there judging you, or how does that work? That just to wrap up.
Yeah. Now, sometimes what people experience during their life review is that sometimes their life review is too painful to watch. It's like, oh my gosh, I really can't watch it. And sometimes they have this being of light at the side of them. And in fact, that being of light, rather than judging them, is acting as a great source of comfort and helping them to confront those things that they don't want to see. So no one is judging that person except themselves. And that's the thing. There's no great judgment there by a greater force. It's the person themselves that's doing the judging.
So just to pick you up on that though, Penny, notice inherent in that story, there is some form of hierarchy. There's a guide next to this person having the life review, right? There are entities connected to this process. I was going to say people then, but there are thinking entities connected to this process in these stories, right?
Yes, there are, yeah. There are, it could be guides, angels, or what people would perceive to be God as well. And this higher force is just being there and being loving and comforting.
So why, you see what I mean? Why would they not hold sway on planet? If this is a real thing, then why would those guides not hold sway on planet Earth, I guess, is the question. But this judging process that happens here, does that mean that actually there is perhaps somewhere a list of rules that we need to obey? Do you understand what I mean by this? There's a book somewhere we should, should we pick up the Bible? Maybe that one's got it on the money. I don't know. I mean, is there something we can turn to for good, reliable advice for when that life review comes up, in your opinion?
I don't know, really. Maybe some of the, ancient spiritual scriptures and things like that, they may resonate with some people. But I think, just living your life with respect for other people is the basis, and the message that these people have is that they can feel how interconnected they are with everyone. So we are all one. We're not separate. That's the great illusion, is that we feel that we're separate from other people and we should be in competition with other people. But in fact, that's not what it's about. It's that we're all equal. We're all part of this one, and what we do to others ultimately comes back to ourselves.
Well, I tell you what, before I let you go, final question as well. You're talking about the life reviews, and what I was interested in your book is that I generally assume, because it's the ones you most often hear, that death and near-death experiences are positive and life-affirming. You kind of come away and you think, all right, I go down a tunnel towards the light, kind of all of the archetypal stuff we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. Some people have had terribly distressing ones, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Some people, their experiences could be so distressing. It's as if they have a form of post-traumatic stress when they come back. There's three different categories of the distressing type. The first one is the usual experience, but it's interpreted in quite a distressing way. The second type is the void experience, where the person feels that they're in this dark, black, meaningless, eternal void. One lady described it as being eternal boredom. And then the third type is the hellish type of experience, where people feel that they're being dragged down into hell by demons, or even looking into hell itself. And that can be very traumatic, and it's much more difficult to research these kinds of experiences because there's a lot of stigma involved. And some people feel, well, I've had this negative experience or this distressing experience. Why has it happened to me? Have I been a bad person throughout my life? What have I done with my life? And so it can, and even the recall of these experiences can evoke real traumatic imagery for them. And so because of that, it's very difficult to research them. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge these experiences as well and try to find a greater understanding of them. Because, I remember looking after a patient when I was a student nurse, and she was she was dying. She knew she was dying. But every time that we passed her bed, she was trying to grab onto the nurses, and she'd dig her nails into our flesh, and she was terrified. You could see this look of terror in her eyes, and she was saying, please don't let me die. I've died before, and it was awful. Now, I'd never heard of near-death experiences at the time. I didn't know what she was talking about. None of my colleagues did. But we spoke with the family, and the family said, well, she did have a cardiac arrest about 5 years ago, but I don't know why she's saying this. Now, on reflection, having had the benefit of doing my research, perhaps when she had her cardiac arrest, she may have had a distressing near-death experience and never talked about it. And so consequently, as she was dying, she was then terrified. So I think it's really important that we understand these experiences so that we can support other people who've had the experience and help them through it as well.
So there's a bias against, of course there is, now you mention it, it's so obvious, isn't it? There's a bias against reporting the negative experiences. Think about that. If I was to have a near-death experience and then be told by an all-powerful demigod being that I'd done the worst things in the world and I was going to hell, I don't think I would talk. What's the ratio of good to bad experiences, do you think?
Well, there's limited research on there, but the research to date shows that approximately about 14% of all near-death experiences can be distressing.
All right, so 1 in 10. Is that balanced for the lack of reporting as well, or could it be likely higher than that?
It could well be higher, and it's just that we don't know about these cases. But since I've been doing my research in the last few years, I did a piece on my blog about the distressing kind, and people have been in contact since. And they've been sort of working through their experiences. And once they've started confronting them, it's started to help the process of putting it back together, really. So they are kind of working through the experience.
Do you know what? I could talk to you forever. I could hold you down for a conversation forever, but I've used so much of your time up. I'm so pleased to have spoken to you today. And I want to thank you for joining us on the show. But what I want to know also is how can people find out more about you? You have a PhD in near-death experiences. Every listener to the Cult of Nick will want to know where you are. Dr. Penny Sartori, tell us where you are. Tell us more detail as how we can find you online.
Right, okay. I've got a website, and it's www.drpennysartori.com. And I've also got a blog, but I haven't been able to get to that in the last couple of years. My life has just kind of got really busy since my first book came out. So, and you can contact me through my website as well. I am quite slow with responses because I'm currently got a backlog of about 14,300 emails that I've still got to respond to, but I will get to you at some point. So, yes.
Wonderful. I tell you what, it's a great book as well. It's part of a series of books, actually, from Watkins, the bookshop, the whatisseries.com. And, what is a near-death experience? Dr. Penny Sartori, are there many other people with a PhD in near-death experiences? No, not the ones who have done. No one's done this sort of research that I've done for a PhD. Yeah, I didn't think so. I mean, that's an awesome claim to fame. And I want to thank you for being on the show, and I really enjoyed your company, Dr. Penny Sartori.
Thank you very much, Nick.
I really enjoyed that interview. That was cracking, wasn't it? I've had a really strange few weeks, month maybe. Yeah, last month or so has been really weird. I went to the Festival 23. That was awesome. 23rd of last month. 23rd of August. I don't even know what month it is. That's the kind of month I've had. I don't know what's going on. But I tell you what, Festival 23 was absolutely awesome. I'm really, really pleased the people who could make it. I'm really, really pleased to have met actual proper cult members as well. People who claim to have listened to every single podcast we've ever done here on the Cult of Nick. That's insane. There's hundreds of them. Some of them are rubbish as well. I've heard them. I mean, let me tell you, it was really interesting. Festival 23 took place at a secret location, which is probably less secret now than it was originally, in kind of the Sheffield area, certainly the city where I first converted to the fake joke religion Discordianism. Yeah, that's right, it's a joke, it's fake, it's stupid, and it was an excuse for a jolly good party. Lots of people gathered together. We had a festival that lasted about 3, 4, 5 days, was it? Officially, maybe it lasted 2 days. I think we had 2 nights. Maybe 3. I can't remember now. That's how confusing it all was. At the moment, I'm sat at work. I've been editing podcasts and producing radio shows because that's my ordinary job, right? And now I'm casting my mind back to Festival 23, which was absolutely insanely good fun. Not that work isn't great fun, right? If the boss is listening, but wow, what did we even do? Listen, it was a gathering of Discordians. There were some members of the IoT, the Illuminates of Thanteros, there. Dave Lee was there. Interesting chap. Interviewed him a little bit back in the timeline of the podcast. Have a little look back. Very, very interesting occultist. Written some great books. And a big influence on my thinking, actually, that guy. I chatted to him a little bit. I chatted to lots of other people I've talked to online a little bit. I chatted to some of the listeners to the podcast who were there. There was about, what would we say, about 15, 20 people who claimed to be full-on cult fans. And then there were a group of people who'd listened to maybe 1 or 2 podcasts in the past that I'd done. Do you see what I mean by this? I kind of have it in my head that the podcast works like this. You've got the hardcore, right? And that's us lot, and we're not normal. That's not normal to listen to loads and loads and loads of one podcast like that. Kind of like you would a box set. This is not a box set of DVDs. All right, so we had the hardcore, and we had a good time. And that's how the podcast worked. You have the hardcore, and then gathered around the hardcore, the sort of, on the edges of the crowd. That's where the mainstream of this podcast is. Our listening figures are pretty high at the moment, actually. We've got about 5,500 people downloading each episode, which I'm really confused by. It leapt up whilst I was away. So what you do to get more listeners to your podcast is stop doing it for a bit and let the archive sit. I think it's because a lot of it's ahead of its time, don't you? Don't you? I mean, some of the conversations I was having were absolutely fascinating with these people who've listened to the whole podcast from beginning to end. And they were pointing out how a lot of the stuff that we've talked about appears to be coming true, appears to be manifesting and so on. One person actually came up to me and said the reason the podcast's taken off is because it's essentially a warning of the oncoming apocalypse. Yeah, that was great. If you're listening, by the way, mate, I thought it was good analysis. But he said it's a clarion call, a prophet of the age of Aquarius, a prophet of the ending of the current age, right? That's what we're doing here. And that's why it's picking up, because people are coming and listening to it maybe 2-3 years later and going, yeah, I think maybe there's some truth in that, right? Anyway, this festival, the intent of it, if there was a magical intent behind it, was to bring about the apocalypse. In a sense, was to bring about the eschaton, to eminentize the eschaton, right? And whether or not the people who were there to dance to dance music knew that or not was irrelevant, because the point of a magical act is that you get the thing done, right? And that's what we did. We did a festival, we had a gathering of people, we did magical rituals, which were great fun. They were all good intent as well. We're not talking like we weren't sacrificing people or anything like that. That'd be absurd. I can't imagine anyone claiming to be a Discordian do that. I had genuinely mystical experiences there. Yeah, that's right. And I'm going to tell you those stories right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save it all up for next week. I say next week, next month, next fortnight, next year, whenever it is I get out the next podcast, I will tell you about my experience of Festival 23. Hopefully we'll chat to some of the people who were there. I'm going to give a big shout out. Yeah, that's right. That's what we're doing on the podcast. A big shout out to Giblet. What an awesome band those guys were. Twitchy Spleen on Twitter. Go hunt him out. He's a cult member. I think, was he a cult member? I think he says he's listened to all the podcasts. So he's one of the hardcore. He's one of the people who listen to the end of the podcast. So that's what I'm doing now. This bit that most people don't even listen to. You listen to the interview, off you go. All right? Twitchy Spleen. And what an interesting character he was. I enjoyed him. I tell you what, I enjoyed his music as well. This guy is in a band, Giblet, who I'm mentioning as well. Big shout out to Giblet. I thought that was great music. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting. And it was a great festival. And I'm going to do a special on it. I'll do a special on it next week. Oh, also, yes, that's the other thing I have to tell you. I feature on a podcast that is not of my own making, I think. It's going to be uploaded at some point. It's called Milk the Cow. I went along and met these people. They were nice. They were doing a live podcast. It was really interesting as well. Apparently they get loads of downloads. They're topping the iTunes chart all the time. What was interesting about it is that these people they weren't radio. Podcasting isn't radio. It's so different to what it is that I used to do. There are similarities, but I really enjoyed hanging out with those people. But I'm going to warn you, right? If you go and download Milk the Cow podcast, where I think if you Google it, you can find it dead easily. But if you go and Google that and you listen to me talking, it's me talking, right? But I'm at a music festival, right? Right now, for example, I'm sat in a very professional environment. I'm being a radio presenter, all right? In fact, all of my life, that's kind of where I've been coming from when I've been talking into a microphone. Maybe the stand-up comedy to one side, but broadly speaking, that's where what I'm saying to you is I'm at a music festival, right? I'm a bit hungover. I'm a bit enchanted by the atmosphere of the place, maybe. It was very smoky kind of atmosphere, a lot of fun, and I'm a bit confused. I'm a bit confused in the piece. I don't know. I think I've not heard it, but I do know that I waffle, talk nonsense, and get into it. But it was kind of interesting to talk about Discordianism in front of a live audience, which is also something I did at Festival 23. I'm going to try maybe next week to go through the talk that I tried to give at Festival 23 about occultism and magic and stuff like that. I ended just kind of waffling and shouting at them and asking them why they hadn't tried sigils. But I gave it a go and gave a talk. That was kind of fun. Had slides and everything. So there we go. Festival 23. That was cracking. I'm going to cover it next week. And I'll tell you what. We are living in interesting times. I want to get into Brexit with you in a sense, but I'm not going to. I've left off it. You probably know which way I've voted in the Brexit thing if you're a regular listener. If you're not and you're new and you're welcome along. Listen, welcome along if you're new to the podcast. I understand we will have picked up new listeners. And what I'm going to say to you is no, I am a Brexiter, right? I wanted out of the European Union, right? But unfortunately for you, my friend, that doesn't fit me into the right-wing box. Yeah, I'm one of those irritating people who wanted out of Brexit that doesn't quite fit the right-wing mould. Yeah, I'm one of those lot. And wow, do I want to get into that with you, but I don't have time. Not really. I mean, I'd have to do a whole thing on it. It's weird. The podcast has hit this point where I'm never sure if I should go too deep into politics because it switches quite a lot of people off and I'm not sure a lot of people are there yet. And at the same time, I'm not sure whether getting interested in politics is good for you emotionally and physically, to be honest. And so I kind of back off a little bit in the podcast because it's what I do in my day-to-day work. But at the same time, what the hell is going on in the world at the moment? Right? And why is it that we've got all these people? Listen, I'm working in London at the moment. I voted out of the European Union. Why? Because I hate massive bureaucracies, right? They frighten me. That European army thing, that was a real thing. I'm convinced of that. And I don't get why we should be part of a pan-national government. I've never really understood that. No one has ever explained to me what's so great about it, right? And so there you are. I voted out of the European Union. But, and here's the thing, because I'm living in London and because everyone here is the trendy metropolitan elite that I joke about and, John Gaunt bangs on about and It's the thing, isn't it? People go, oh, the trendy lefty media. Right, I'm right in the epicenter of that. I've grown up in the epicenter of that. I was born into that place pretty much. And what I'm saying to you is that, wow, politics is so strange at the moment because no one is interested in why you did what you did. Instead, what they're so keen to do, if they're talking to you about this issue and they support the European Union, they're interested in closing down what you say and then shouting at you for reasons that don't really relate to what it is that you've done, right? And it's good-natured in a sense, I'm not saying that I'm like arguing with people in work and stuff all the time, although I am occasionally, but argument puts the wrong slant on it. It's not like I want to, beat these people to death or anything like that. I'm putting forward my point of view. What I'm saying is I'm getting a lot of bleed back from people who disagree with my point of view. Brilliant. But at the same time, aren't actually interested in my point of view. It's very strange. It's very weird how politics is going at the moment. More and more people crawling into their boxes. But I tell you this, if you're a listener to the Cult of Nick, and this is the first time you've ever listened, please listen to a few more episodes and get drawn into this strange world that we're creating. Because here, right, we don't actually think left wing and right wing is a real thing. We think it's something designed to mess you up, right? To take you down into the strangeness of a world where you have to agree with things you don't really agree with in order to be part of a group. Because that's how it works, isn't it? What you think, there's two boxes here, right? One's got left wing written on it, one's got right wing written on it. And if you're going for the right wing, you've got to believe in capital punishment, royal family, and the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, right? What would that be? That's right wing, I guess. Left wing, open up that one. What does it say? It says we want to redistribute wealth and we want to do the global warming thing and we support gay marriage. And these things do not necessarily all correlate with each other. There may be some people who love gay marriage and want to bring back capital punishment, right? Obviously, there may be some people who think that, global warming is a scam, but it's time to redistribute wealth, right? And the reason politics has become so remote nowadays is because you've got these two groups of people who are so keen to exclude anyone who disagrees with them, the left wing and the right wing. I'm going to put that in quotes because I don't even believe these groups exist in an actual literal sense. I think they're traps of the mind. And what I'm saying to you is that, really, seriously, if someone disagrees with you, ask them why. Don't put them in a box and start shouting about why you think they disagree with you. And honestly, if you go around bragging about how right-wing you are or how left-wing you are, do you know what? All you're really doing is bragging about only having half a brain. See you next Tuesday! Probably. Ages from now, probably. I don't know.